Good afternoon, good afternoon, and welcome to this episode of The Blacker the Berry. We're going to continue. This is episode number 3. I apologize. I wasn't with you guys last week. I was a little under the weather, so I skipped. And yesterday was not my finest day either, so I skipped that as well. But we're going to jump right in. What we're going to do today is we're going to continue on talking about the Atlantic slave trade. But in this particular episode, I want to talk about the brutality of the Atlantic slave trade, and I don't want you to just listen to this episode. I really want you to do something with me. Again, I do not want you to just listen to this episode. I want you to picture it, because what we're about to talk about is not just history, it's lived experience. Okay? So I want you to imagine this, that you're living your life. You have a family, a language, a community. And then all of a sudden, one day, you're taken. Not asked, not warned, just taken. Now, during the Atlantic slave trade, millions of African, rather, sorry, not American. During the Atlantic slave trade, millions of African people were captured. Some were through raids. Of course, villages were raided. Some were through warfare. Some through betrayal by people who were forced into systems of trade themselves. So imagine that. Families were separated instantly. Children separated from parents. Spouses separated from each other. No goodbyes. Before the ships, right? There were holding areas, places where people were confined, sometimes for weeks, sometimes even longer than that. Confused, terrified, not knowing where they were being taken or why. Are you with me still? Then came the journey, the Middle Passage. People were packed in the ships so tightly they could barely move, chained together, lying in their own waste. If one person got sick, it spread quickly. If someone died, their body might remain there for hours, sometimes longer, before being removed. Can you picture it? Some people chose death, jumping overboard rather than living through what was ahead. And if you survived that journey, you were not welcomed. You were processed, examined, touched, then sold. Just like property. Your name, gone. Your identity, stripped. Your past, erased. From that point on, your life was not your own. You were forced to work under threat, under violence. Punishments were severe, not just to control, but to break people. And this is the part I need you to hold on to. These were not statistics. These were not statistics. These were people, people who laughed, people who loved, people who dreamed, people who never chose any of this. So when we talk about slavery, we're not talking about something distant. We're talking about real human suffering on a massive scale. And we have to be honest about that, because minimizing it, it doesn't change what happened. Ignoring it doesn't erase it. The purpose of this conversation is not to shock you, it's to ground you. It's to ground you in truth, in understanding, and in the reality of what was taken and what people endured. Because you can't fully understand the present if you refuse to face the past. So we're going to talk about the resistance, the survival, and the legacy. So after hearing all of that, it would be easy to walk away feeling like the story ends in suffering, but it doesn't. Because even in the middle of all that brutality, people resisted. Resistance didn't always look like what we imagined. It wasn't always loud. It wasn't always visible. Sometimes resistance was survival. Sometimes resistance was survival. It was holding on to language when everything around you tried to erase it. It was remembering your name, even when someone tried to give you another one. It was passing down stories when reading and writing were denied. That's resistance. People rebuilt community in places designed to strip it away. They created family where family had been broken. They created music out of pain. They created faith expressions. They carried them through what they were facing. Spirituals, rhythms, ways of worship that still exist today. And yes, there were also rebellions, people who fought back, uprisings, escapes, refusals, even knowing the consequences. That's courage. And that endurance is not separate from us. It's part of what shaped everything that came after. Families, communities, culture. The resilience you see today, it didn't come out of nowhere. It came from people who survived what should have broken them. So when we talk about this history, we can't only talk about what was done to the people. We also have to talk about what the people did in response. How did they adapt? How did they endure? How did they carry something forward even when everything was taken? Because that matters. It changes how you see yourself. It changes how you understand struggle. It changes how you understand strength. So, yes, the history is painful. Yes, it's heavy, but it's also a story of survival, a story of people who refuse to disappear. And that legacy is still here. We remember the pain, but we also honor the strength. And in doing so, there's something I need to make clear. The story of slavery is not just a story of suffering, it's also a story of resistance, as we just said. Because even in a system that's designed to control every part of a person's life, think about this. The system was designed to control every part of the person's life, but people still found ways to fight back. And it was not always in the same way, but it was always with intention. And some of those acts of resistance were led by individuals that refused to accept the system as it was, in spite of. One of those individuals was Toussaint Louverture. He was an enslaved man who became a leader of one of the most successful slave revolts in history, the Haitian Revolution. He helped lead a movement that didn't just resist slavery, it ended it. After him came Jean-Jacques Dessalines. He carried that fight forward and he helped secure independence for Haiti, making it the first Black republic born from a successful slave revolt. Now let's bring it closer to home. Resistance was not limited to just one place. It happened throughout the Americas, including here in what became the United States. In 1831, a man named Nat Turner, he led a rebellion in Virginia. It was one of the most well-known uprisings in U.S. history, and it sent shockwaves through the system. Then came Denmark Vesey. He was a man who planned a large-scale revolt in Charleston, South Carolina, my home state. Though it was discovered before it could fully unfold, his intent was clear. The intent rather was clear. People were organizing. And before that, Gabriel Prosser, another planned uprising, showing that resistance, it was not isolated, it was ongoing. And these are just a few names, because for every well-documented leader, there were countless others whose names were never recorded. People who resisted in smaller ways, working slower, breaking tools, learning to read in secret, running away, forming free communities. All of that was resistance. There were even entire communities formed by people who escaped slavery. They were called maroon communities. These were places where people built their lives outside of the system that was meant to control them. So when people ask, why didn't they fight back? The real answer is they did. They did. But fighting back didn't always look like open rebellion. Sometimes it looks like survival. Sometimes it looks like preservation. Sometimes it looks like waiting for the right moment. The truth is, you're here today because people resisted, because they refused to disappear, because they believed, even in the worst conditions, that there was something worth fighting for. And that spirit is still alive. That spirit is still alive. This episode wasn't going to be a very long one today. I just wanted to come by and give y'all just a little something to work with, because I didn't want to make the brutality of the Atlantic slave trade so graphic that you lost interest or that you emotionally disconnected. But in having this conversation, we need to have the conversation. Hollywood, in their way, has sensationalized exactly what happened during the Middle Passage. But what I want to do, or what I'm hoping that I've done, is that I was able to humanize what happened in such a way. Again, these were people that weren't asked if they wanted to be taken away. These were people who were given new names, people whose identities were erased. These were people that were brought to a new place under savage conditions, with a lot of their loved ones never making it with them, seeing the things they saw on the journey. I can only imagine. And then we wonder why and how trauma lingers. The same spirit that led to those uprisings, it's the same spirit that many of us we have today. We can't forget those that came before us. We cannot forget about the sacrifices. We cannot forget about the prayers. We cannot forget about the hope that we would have something better than they ever dreamt of. We can't forget that. And if we do, we're doomed. Now is not a time to fall away. Now is not a time to fall back. Now is not a time to fall asleep. Now is a time to wake up, educate yourself. What is it that is being deleted? What is it that is being hidden from me? That is the thing that needs to be made, uh, be brought to the forefront. That's the thing that I want to talk about, because there's hidden wisdom in that. Why would I want to hide something from you unless I wanted to continue to control you? So the narrative has to be taken back. We have to remember. We have to remember, but the only way to remember is to talk about. There's so many directions that I really want to go with this episode. And there are things that I want to say that'll come across as controversial, but that's not my intention, and that's not my desire, and it's not my hope. But we've been lulled to sleep. We have forgotten who we are. There are those of us that assimilate to other cultures because we're ashamed of our own, whether it's in a romantic relationship or education wise, it doesn't matter. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not against it. I'm not against it. But never, ever, ever forsake your own, desert your own, put down your own at the expense of another. Because at the end of the day, when you do that, you spit in the faces of all the ancestors that made it possible for you to be here. You spit on the sacrifices that they made. You make their living in vain, and you make their dying worthless. We owe it to ourselves. We owe it to our ancestors to learn how to teach each other, to learn how to talk about what happened, not just to each other, but to all mankind. All mankind. Again, there is no world history. There is no American history if there is no Black history. We have to tell the story of those that weren't able to tell it for themselves. We have to give voice to those who were voiceless. There were so many who didn't make it because they wanted freedom as opposed to the enslaved life. They were willing to suffer the brutal attacks. They were willing to suffer being drowned. They were willing to endure anything but the thing that was designed to erase them, strip them of their identity, strip them of their humanity. And here we are, not understanding that black is so beautiful because somebody told us that it's a curse. When we just talked about the strength, the resilience, and the resistance of where we come from, of who we come from, the stories that have survived over the years, and we dare spit in the faces of those that made it possible for us. Again, this episode I thought would be longer than it is, but it's not. And I feel like I've given you enough. And if I continue, I'm going to start rambling. And I don't want to do that because I want this to land. I want you to think about what this episode was talking about, the brutality. Talk about it. Have the conversation with somebody. There are books you can purchase. There's one right now, that the Transatlantic Slave Trade. I'll post a link in the description once I post the video. It's a good book to have. There's some other Black history books that I have. We're inventors. We're teachers. We're doctors, lawyers. We're educators. Don't let anybody tell you that DEI defines you, because it didn't. You're defined by so much more. Don't forget. This has been another episode of The Black of the Berry. I'm going to be here next week. Hopefully same time. Actually, no, on Saturday. But I want you to continue the conversation. But in order to continue the conversation, begin the research. Trust the process. Embrace the journey. Know your history. Share your history. And remember, the blacker the berry, the deeper the truth.